Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. James Palmer here with another Insider Notebook here at Bleacher Report. Thank you for dealing with the technical difficulties. We're a couple minutes late, so we'll go a couple minutes longer. Don't worry. We'll get through a lot of news today, and a lot of news is expected over the next maybe 48, 72 hours within the NFL. With some of these openings, we're not even going to today touch on the two teams playing in the Super Bowl, to be honest with you. That's with Seattle and New England. No, we're going to talk about what's happening with the rest of the NFL and all of the other coaching hires and to-be hires that are going on. There was a big one that dropped today. We'll start with that, with the Bills and hiring Joe Brady, their offensive coordinator, from within. We also have the Browns are still a part of their search, which is very different than the other ones. We'll talk about maybe who they may land on there, and then some of the other things that are going on with the coordinators. Another move at a coordinator spot in New York has actually just happened before we started this show. We'll tell you about Philadelphia, the offensive coordinator spot, maybe Vegas, a couple of other things that are going on, and then why we're having some guys withdrawal this year. I feel like it happens every season, but maybe this year more than others, we're seeing guys actually take their names out of the race in certain instances. I'll tell you why that's kind of happened. Also, the bridge year. That's in the terms of the quarterback. This is a light quarterback class in a lot of people's eyes. I know it's still early, but after Fernando Mendoza, it's kind of seems a little light. What does that mean for some other guys that are currently in the league that could potentially be changing teams? And then we'll finish with Shedeur Sanders. I'm sorry, Pro Bowl quarterback Shedeur Sanders, and what that means, how they got there, why he's in the Pro Bowl, and what I think he should do while he's there. Okay, let's start with Joe Brady landing the job and not really having to move his family. He's just going to have to change offices. The offensive coordinator that has worked well with Josh Allen, and they've had one of the better offenses over the last couple of years since he took over after Sean McDermott made an in-season move, making him the offensive coordinator, relieving Ken Dorsey of his duties a couple of years ago. Joe Brady's done very well with Josh Allen, and now he is the next head coach of the Buffalo Bills. So how did we get here? Well, remember, Buffalo was actually behind the eight ball a little bit because they actually decided to get into this a little bit late. Because of the rules, they actually can't interview anybody from the Seahawks or Patriots right now until after the Super Bowl because they didn't interview them in the first cycle. But that didn't really matter because their eyes were set on Joe Brady. Now, they were always set on the offensive side of the ball. I think last week I was speaking to all of you here and told you that, yes, offense is where they're going to go. Josh Allen had a seat at the table. Literally, a lot of these quarterbacks are abreast of the situation. They were constantly calling Lamar Jackson. Steve Bisciotti was on the phone with him. Hey, Lamar, this is what's going on. This happens with a lot of other quarterbacks. Not really the way it went with Josh Allen. He was actually in the room, to my understanding, not just popping in and out. He was there for the process, there for the interviews, and a lot of these guys had ties to him. It was Brian Daboll, obviously, has the ties to Josh Allen, there with him for the beginning of his career. It was kind of the dream job for Daboll. We'll talk about where he's possibly headed next. Now that he didn't land this job, Davis Webb, I'm told, actually had a very, very good interview with them. They believe he is a head coach and ready to be one right now at 30. They thought the world of him in his interview, but obviously a little bit maybe green, and they go with the synergy and the connection that Joe Brady has to Allen and the rest of this team. Now, I do know that there's plenty of people that are sitting here going, okay, we heard Terry Pegula say that they hit the proverbial playoff wall. They needed massive change to get past that. This doesn't feel like a massive change. You kept the same general manager. You actually promoted him to now head of football operations as well as general manager. And you take your offensive coordinator and make him your head coach. Where are these massive sweeping changes? That's to be determined, in all honesty. And that's going to be up to Joe Brady, who was essentially hired, to my understanding, by Brandon Beane and the rest of the people in that organization who made that decision, but Brandon probably the one at the top. And this actually puts more pressure on the general manager and head of football operations, honestly. And we look at this roster, and those are some of the questions. But the CEO aspect of kind of leading the entire building, I'm told that that's where Joe Brady really knocked it out of the park. And that's where he really separated himself a little bit. And I think that part of it is where maybe we see the biggest change in what happens within this Bills organization. But I do understand that a lot of people have questions about this not being enough of a change for what they want to do in Buffalo. So we'll see. But they go with Joe Brady, who did in all honesty, well in some of his other interviews. I think he did very well in Baltimore. Jesse Minter was kind of always their guy, but he did impress in Baltimore, so that's another spot that I think he did pretty well. And it was interesting because now we're going to see what happens to Vegas, and we'll get involved in that. We'll go to the Browns next. But there was a lot of similar candidates between Buffalo and between Vegas. What does that mean for Vegas? I'll get to that in just a second. But this was a kind of a wide search, and they went through a lot of different people. Philip Rivers being one of them, who dropped out. And my understanding is he's just kind of dropping out for the time being. He liked the process. It actually was somewhat legitimate as him potentially being a candidate. I don't know, it was legitimate for him being a candidate, but I could see him re-entering that type of mix down the road. When that happens, we'll see. They do need a new offensive line coach, a new special teams coordinator, a new offensive coordinator. Now, Ronald Curry's been there as the quarterback coach. He could potentially be the one to slide into that OC. We'll see. And we'll obviously see what Joe Brady does at the defensive side of the ball and what he does for defensive coordinator. We'll see what they end up doing there. Okay. Let's get to the Browns. There's a lot of stuff in here leaning towards Webb. I see that the Bills' newest scapegoat. Okay, so Kubiak to the Raiders is a done deal. Just waiting for the Super Bowl game to end. Yes, he cannot officially be hired until after the Super Bowl, in all honesty. Sounds like, well, I must hit something where I can comment on that. Sounds like Kubiak or Webb in Vegas. We'll get to that. Joe Brady is him. We see a lot of, Joe Brady seems like a very polarizing guy. Lamar was at the interviews? No. Lamar was in Florida. What they would do is they would call Lamar after their interviews and kind of keep him abreast on how their search was going. That's essentially where it was at. Josh Allen actually sitting in these interviews, that doesn't happen in other places. That was kind of a new wrinkle that we saw Buffalo go and end up doing. Builds DC options. I think it's going to be very interesting. There's still some other spots out there that are somewhat available, and a lot of them have already been filled. So the Bills were kind of behind in this whole process, if you remember where they're at. I don't know of anyone actually right now who would be on his DC list. Why is the Eagles' position so radioactive? We'll get to that. I hope Trim Schwartz as DC again in Buffalo. Let's get to that because we're going to go to the Browns right now and talk about where they stand. It really does seem, as I talk to more and more people around the league, that this is a job that seems like it's kind of coming down to Nate Scheelhaase, the quarterback's coach and passing game coordinator that is in with the Rams, and Jim Schwartz. And there's always been this thought from the beginning, and I think I mentioned it on here, that Jim Schwartz has a very realistic chance of getting this job. Grant Nudinsky ends up dropping his name out. He's a very bright young coach. He was kind of in the running for that Bills job. Now expect him to go back to Jacksonville as their offensive coordinator. She's kind of a 35-year-old kind of wonderkind type of guy who was a former quarterback, definitely can control the room. Is he the type of young guy that you think can you discover early in a very unique process that the Browns are going through? And a lot of people are being very critical of it, whether it's the essays or the different types of things you have to fill out or the questionnaires. They're very data driven, and they're trying to look at this in a very different manner than which some of the other teams are. And if it works, they look like geniuses. If it doesn't work, obviously they'll look like the way the Browns have looked recently. But there's been kind of four guys that have this has come down to. The two I mentioned, Todd Monken and Anthony Lynn. But it really seems like those are the two, Scheelhaase and Schwartz, where it stands. Now, I saw this in here and I kind of wanted to mention it. What happens with Jim Schwartz? Somebody in Buffalo says in here, the chat, they'd like to see him go back there. If he doesn't land the job, I don't think it's a slam dunk that he stays as the defensive coordinator. I think we all know what type of wiring Jim Schwartz has. I think his players love him. I think he probably deserves another opportunity as a head coach. If you remember when he took over Detroit, that team was absolutely abysmal. The roster was awful. And by year 3, he actually started turning things around, and maybe he should get another opportunity. But if he isn't him and it goes to a 35-year-old guy who's never been a coordinator, has never called plays, does he want to stay in that building? I don't think it's as clear cut as when Kevin Stefanski got that job down in Atlanta, and it was like, yes, Jeff Ulbricht's going to be staying as a defensive coordinator. He's done a very, very good job on that side of the ball. I don't think it's that clear cut. We'll have to see what ends up happening. I will say this, with Scheelhaase, being a former quarterback, being a guy that spent a ton of time with Matt Campbell, who people in the NFL think the world of Matt Campbell, who was the head coach at Iowa State for an eternity and is now the new head coach at Penn State. NFL people have been really speaking to him and curious about him actually as a NFL head coach in previous years, and really respect the type of coach he is and the football program he built. That's one part of Shields. Obviously, the other part is he played that role of designing all of those plays that you've seen other guys go through, whether for Sean McVay, whether it's Zach Taylor or others, or LaFleur or these other guys that have become head coaches. He does have a good pedigree, and a lot of people think the world of him. We'll see what they end up deciding to do there in Cleveland, but I think it's kind of coming down to both of those two guys. Let's get to the remaining carousel here. Eagles head coaching news. That's what I'm hearing. I heard Todd Monken was signing with the Giants. I think that's very still much in play. It's kind of similar to. It's kind of similar to all of the other opportunities that are out there where like Brian Dable is going, if I want the Bills job, that's what I want. If not, I'm most likely going to take the Titans job. It's kind of similar to that. And so either Shieldhouse or it's going to be Schwartz, who are going to be one of the guys that ends up landing with this opportunity to be the next head coach for the Browns. So what number head coach would that be? Well, I asked Copilot. To show us which NFL teams have had the most head coaches since 2000, and here's what we found out. According to Copilot, first, well, the Oakland and Las Vegas Raiders, 15 since 2000. Tied for second, Cleveland Browns at 12. They're looking for number 13. Vegas is looking for number 16. Detroit Lions are tied for second with 12. And Miami is there with 11. So we'll see who ends up being the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns. All right, to the rest of these remaining coaching carousel type of options. There's a lot of stuff in here about the Eagles OC spot. They have now been somewhat connected to 13 different candidates. They had Mike McDaniel and Brian Dable at the top of their list. Now, those two guys were probably granted a little bit more leeway and control of the way this entire offense was going to be run. Now that both of them are essentially out, I guess Dable's not entirely out, but I haven't heard of him really considering the Philadelphia job, as he's really leaning towards that Titans offensive coordinator job if he doesn't get the job in Vegas or just decides to take that job with the Titans. He really wants to go out there and help mold Cam Ward and help that young quarterback get off his feet. And I think Brian Dable probably assumes, too, that that is a great spot to be with Robert Saleh and Cam Ward in a young organization to get yourself back into the head coaching cycle, maybe after a year or two, as he's been a candidate, obviously, in this cycle. So with those two out, you look at all the other guys that have been there, Jim Bob Cooter and Brian Dable, I mentioned him, Zach Robinson ends up taking the Bucs job. My understanding was Robinson clearly thought that Baker Mayfield was a better quarterback to work with than Jalen Hurts. Bobby Slowick ends up taking the Dolphins job, and I think Jeff Hafley, that was a big part of it. They had a relationship dating back to San Francisco. Both were on the defensive side of the ball down there, and I think Hafley really respected the type of mind that Bobby Slowick has, and that was kind of not, I don't want the Eagles job from Bobby Slowick. I haven't spoken to him, but outside of just congratulating him, but it seems more like this is the fit in Miami to work with Jeff Hafley, and the two of them obviously had that previous relationship that really played a part in that. Matt Nagy is still out there. He ended up not getting the Titans job. My understanding was he was in the running for the Ohio State job that ended up going to Arthur Smith. Greg Roman was kind of in the running for that as well. They were looking for an offensive-minded pro coach on that side. It ends up going to Arthur Smith. So we'll see. Nagy's still out there. Declan Doyle withdraws, and he ends up going back to the Bears to continue to work with Ben Johnson, a guy that a lot of people think could be a head coach down the road. Charlie Weiss stays at LSU. Gerard Johnson ended up meeting with Frank Smith. It's been an interesting list. I'll tell you this. I think there are a lot of guys that have spoken that are on the offensive side of the ball to one another about this job, and there's a lot of questions that candidates have. I know Philadelphia is selling that they have a very, very talented offense, and they do. They have a Super Bowl MVP quarterback. But I think if you talk to guys that have been there before, that have had success, even like Kellen Moore, will tell you that you do have to play a specific brand of football there. Is that wrong? No. Are there certain shortcomings with Jalen Hurts you need to make sure you hide at best and accentuate his strengths? That's every single quarterback. But can you run exactly what you want to run? I think Philadelphia plays a part in this as well. The previous offensive coordinator, Kevin Patullo, was the most hated man in Philadelphia right now. He got his house egged. Do people want to walk into that situation? I know it sounds crazy to bring that up. I'm from Philadelphia, but that is all part of the equation, and everybody has been one and done for one reason or another. Now, Philadelphia will say two of those guys get head coaching jobs, so that's part of the equation of this as well. I just think this is a fascinating job that, to my understanding, there is starting to be, I think, a very, very wide net cast, and read into that how you would want to about where they stand and why this net is becoming cast so large. Raiders head coaching job. Let's get to that. We have a lot of Eagles stuff in here. Huh? Nobody wants Nagy. Laugh my I would say Arthur Smith. He ends up getting the thing. I think Dable and the Titans would be nice. Yep, I think that's kind of what's most likely going to happen. Um, what do we got? I mean, Batula was just bad play caller, to be fair. I think there's a lot of issues with the offense. I think plenty of those can fall on Kevin for sure. Fire Nick. I think that is another part of this. I'll just put this out there as well. You could be joining a staff that I think is going to be very heavily evaluated in the 2026 season. Nick Sirianni has won a boatload of games. It's one of the best winning percentages to start a career in the history of the NFL. It's been outstanding. All he does is go to the postseason and been to 2 Super Bowls in his first, 5 years there. But I do think there's a lot of evaluations on this staff. There's a lot of pieces that are already in place. Like, you know that Jeff Stoutland's most likely going to stay. You know that Jamal Singleton, the running back coach, is most likely going to stay. Can you bring a lot of your own people in? Do you have to run Nick Sirianni's system? There's a lot of questions to ask. I mean, these aren't my words, but on my show on The Athletic with Chase Daniel, who was in that building, he said it's not a great building. It's dysfunctional. I've never specifically heard that or been told that, but that was Chase's opinion on that. No way they fire Nick. I think he's been outstanding. You're looking at a Nick Sirianni supporter. But what I've heard rumblings is a lot of things will be evaluated in the next season. And I think Nick did a great job the last time that they were going to evaluate a lot of things with Nick Sirianni and others. And I think he went up and won a Super Bowl when I think his seat got a little bit hot, if you ask people on that coaching staff. He went out and won a Super Bowl after it. All right, how about the Raiders job? I think this one's fascinating. It's been really, really interesting, and candidates have been very curious about the process themselves. Ones that I've spoken to have said, I'm not really sure who's running this process. Tom Brady's there for some of the interviews. He's not there for some of the other interviews. I thought he was running the entire show with John Spytek. Why isn't he here? He was actually calling the game, the NFC title game, that Clint Kubiak was putting on a masterclass of offensive play calling, and he was watching that firsthand while they were that day interviewing Joe Brady for their job. And so it's just been a very interesting process that the Raiders have been going through, and there have been candidates that have left that building scratching their head going, I'm not entirely sure who's in charge or what level everybody is running this particular operation. I think a lot of people are connecting the dots to Clint Kubiak. I think Davis Webb is still a candidate there. There are people in Buffalo, and I mentioned it earlier, that said he could take that Vegas job, and I think he'd be all right with it. We just ended up going internally with Joe Brady. Or he could go back to Denver and keep working with Sean Payton and probably be a really, really sought-after candidate next year. I think Brian Dable's still kind of in the mix there. But if I had a guess right now, I'd probably say Clint Kubiak is one that I kind of have circled a little bit. I think the other names are good. But I also am curious if Clint wants it. Does he want to change locations again? He's been to 5 teams in 5 years. Does he want to make that 6 and 6? I mean, a head coaching opportunity is outstanding. I think we're going to wait on this one. This one, when I said earlier that, a lot of people think of these jobs are going to be filled very quickly, this might be one that takes a minute. The Cardinals job. This one's fascinating to me. It seems to be the least talked about job that is out there. I think there's a couple guys, Mike LaFleur, I think Vance Joseph obviously has ties to that. And now that the Broncos are out of it, they can speak to him further. I think there's just it has a very different feel to it than some of these other ones. The Titans offensive coordinator job, I mentioned that. I think that's going to be Brian Dable. Talking to people this morning, if he doesn't get the Vegas job, I still think there is a stronger chance he gets that Titans job more so than anything, and I think that's going to play a big part. Mike McCarthy gets announced today. Actually did just tell everybody in that press conference that, yeah, he would definitely want Aaron Rodgers back. That wasn't the reason they hired him, but Mike comes out in his press conference and says, yeah, I want Aaron Rodgers back. We'll see what happens. I think getting the quarterback of the future is a big part of why they went out and got Mike McCarthy. Tanner Enstrom, the offensive coordinator for the Jets, has parted ways with the organization. That happened right before we started the show. Keep an eye on him landing back with Ben Johnson, possibly with the Bears, or possibly landing back in Detroit. I think they still have a tight end position open there, and he has coached that position there in the past. I do think they want to go over some veteran offensive minds there with the Jets, but after 1 year, the Jets are replacing their OC and their DC. Just kind of an odd way to kind of go about it. All right, what else do you guys have? It should be Kubiak. Raiders would turn it around. I mean, if anybody watched that NFC title game, by the way, Clint Kubiak was in his bag. Some of those designs, the putting Jackson Smith and Jigba in the backfield on the touchdown was just an unbelievable play design. It was just, on my show with Steve Smith, we were breaking that down, and Steve was just like, That's just for a receiver to come out of that spot and the way that you can put that box zone in a compromising situation, just awesome. Um, what else do we got on here? Hoosiers QB coach should be Raiders' new head coach. That's obviously linking Fernando Mendoza as the number one quarterback. And we'll get to kind of some of the stuff with that. What else do we got? Pro Bowl fan voting always wins. I mean, Petula was just bad play caller. I think I saw that. Woody Johnson needs to sell the team already. Hoosiers QB coach. A lot of Hoosiers QB coach on here. I didn't mention Signetti. I've actually heard from some people there that like he really doesn't have any interest in the NFL, Kirk Signetti. It's kind of interesting. All right, this one's quick. I just wanted to mention it. Why certain candidates are withdrawing from jobs. This has been an interesting year. It's probably been more so than some other years about why some of these coaches are withdrawing their names. I think it's important to not get it really confused that every interview is not specifically a job offer. That's kind of the way we should look at it with that Philly job, where it's like everybody's turning down this Eagles job. I don't think everybody they're interviewing, they're bringing them in saying we want to hire you. I think it has to be both sides interviewing each other in the process. I also do believe there's times where coaches pull out is an indication also that the team might not be interested. And I think that is a part of this as well, where a coach may get interviewed, the interview does not go great. Both sides understand that it's not going to happen. To save face for the candidates at times, and this happens, is then they'll just say, "Can I pull out of this process?" And the team will say, "Yeah, you can certainly pull out of this process." And so some of that does go on. There was also, I think some of the candidates this year were not, to my understanding, very interested in using one team to leverage another team. They kind of had the teams that they wanted to be with circled. Before you find out you're far enough down the road with that team that this is probably going to happen, you don't really rule yourself entirely out of the other spots. This kind of happened with Jesse Minter. After he interviewed with the Raiders and then he interviewed with the Ravens, he kind of knew the way those interviews went. He was going to land one of those two spots. So he went and canceled him and withdrew from, I believe, the Browns, and he had an interview, I think, with the Cardinals coming up, and he wasn't going to do either one of those. So I do think there's a little bit of a game being played by some of these candidates of pitting teams against each other, which is kind of nice, honestly. And that's kind of how some of that has kind of gone down. Davis said he'll shave his bowl cut if the Raiders make the playoffs next season. All right, here we go. Let's go with, what was this? Any news on Patricia? Is he staying at Ohio State? I believe so. And I think they really want to keep this kind of pro style that they have on both sides of the ball. I think they went with Arthur Smith mainly because if it was going to be Matt Nagy, you're outstanding in the pass probably, and then how do you work your run game? If you go with Greg Roman, I would say Ryan Day would probably have to be running almost the pass game, and Greg Roman be running the football. I think with Arthur Smith, you get a touch of both of those at Ohio State. As a Buckeye, I'm just kind of curious what kind of NIL money we're going to get from Arthur Smith being, the part of that billionaire FedEx world. Okay, this is an interesting one. Kind of the bridge year. The quarterbacks in this draft we're early in the process, are not very, very highly sought after. It's not one of those classes where we're going to see a bunch of guys at the top. It might be Fernando Mendoza and maybe another first-round quarterback, maybe not. Everybody's looking at that 2027 draft class. You could see by the way the Jets approached it, and they wanted multiple draft picks in these trades that they made at the deadline to be in 27, not 26. Quarterback was, my understanding, part of that. There's teams that are looking for quarterbacks. Could we see the price for, say, Kyler Murray, who everybody I speak to around the NFL expects not to be with the Arizona Cardinals after this 2025 season has concluded and won't be on the roster in 2026? Now, we do have to say this. We don't know what's going to happen when that staff comes in and what kind of say that head coach has or what kind of conversation they have with Monty and have a conversation with Michael Bidwell about what they think they should do at the quarterback position. Obviously, they don't have a head coach yet, so we can't put anything in stone. But I do think there's been some reports out there going that the price for Kyler Murray could be going up because the draft doesn't have that many capable quarterbacks. Well, I think you could say that and sell it. I also think you could say that there's not that many buyers at quarterback either. When you go through the list of teams, you could say Tua's probably going to be moving on in Miami, and you could say Kyler's most likely going to be moving on in Arizona. and the Jets don't have a quarterback, that's essentially three teams right now. I think you could say Minnesota's in that group, but is that essentially just like a real starter? You still have JJ McCarthy. Atlanta is in the mix, I guess you could say, in some capacity, but they still have Michael Penix. There's just not nearly as many teams as you think could be looking for quarterbacks. Now, I do think Kyler Murray will have a market, to my understanding. Now, some people think that's a day two pick. I think that's probably right. They're going to have to eat some money for sure. The money is definitely a big part of this. And just to put it out there, I want to make sure I get it right, so I wrote it out. Murray is set to earn 29.835 million dollars, which will become fully guaranteed on the fifth day of the 2025 league year. That happened. So 22.8 million and 17 million in roster bonuses. They would have a dead cap hit of just 17.9 million. I don't think that's astronomical when you look at what the Denver Broncos just went through and made their way to the AFC title game, where they were still paying an $84 million cap hit split between 2 years to Russell Wilson. And so they have a cap savings of $35 million. Do they eat some more of that money to make this draft pick maybe be a little bit higher? We'll see. They could certainly go out and put Jacoby Brissett out there this year in 2026 and be probably fine. If they trade him after June 1, the dead cap hit is 10.7 million. That's not like an unreal amount. They have a lot of guys on rookie contracts that are at key positions, whether it's left tackle or wide receiver. So they're actually in not the worst spot possible. I think it's him and it's Tua. But the other guy that I wanted to mention in this, in terms of these bridge quarterbacks that some teams might be looking, is Malik Willis. The Jets could certainly go after Malik Willis. I would think the Dolphins could. Obviously, Jeff Hafley and John Eric Sullivan, their new general manager, will have plenty of information on Willis and how they see him and how they view him as a quarterback after spending so much time with him in Green Bay. He's a quarterback in terms of free agency. You don't need to give up any sort of compensation, and you just can acquire him. And people I've talked to around the league think you can get him for maybe 15 million, 18 million with incentives built into that. And that's saving yourself a lot of money. And you don't have to give up the draft capital. If somebody obviously lands him, that takes one of the few teams out of the running. And then is the market still going up for somebody like Kyler Murray or Tua Tagovailoa? I'm not entirely sure. So I wanted to kind of clarify that in terms of where teams are at that are looking, because the teams that need quarterbacks are going to be the teams that are looking to ship off Tua or Kyler Murray. Okay, before I get to Shedeur Sanders at the end, let's see what we got here. How could Lincoln Riley is being interviewed? I don't think he wants to be. No Browns head coach. I think it's down to 2. I kind of mentioned that. Who's your Super Bowl pick? I think for the vast majority of the season, I had always thought that the Rams and the Seahawks were the best teams in football. I had thought that the Seahawks were the most complete team in football. Super Bowl pick is most likely going to be the Seattle Seahawks. If Sam Darnold keeps playing the way he's playing and doesn't turn the football over, I think that's certainly it. All right, you guys aren't fans of the Browns? We got plenty of Brown stuff in here. See, there's more stuff in here. You know, I think the Hoosiers goes. I worry about Webb potentially taking the biggest job because lack of play calling experience. Is that valid? Certainly, I wouldn't be shocked when Davis Webb takes a head coaching job. And I don't know if he's getting. I just think he has impressed in his interviews. He's been brought back for second interviews on purpose. I think that the Bills were very impressed with him. They think he's ready. Talking to them this morning, but I think he would bring probably experience with him. Would he bring Cliff Kingsbury with him? He played for him at Texas Tech. There's a relationship there. I think Dable's taken that Titans job, but you could always link Dable to Davis because he coached and has known him from multiple spots, whether that's in Buffalo or New York. So I think the coordinators he brings with him, I think would be a big part. I will say this. Well, I just threw my pen. I would say this, that Jarrett Stidham and I had a conversation after Davis called, I know it's a preseason game, but called one preseason game this year. Sean Payton let him do it for the whole game. And they were like, he was incredible. Like it was so seamless. It was so flawless. I do think when you look at Davis Webb, and I think this is a good comp for it. People around the league were nervous that the Rams were jumping at the gun a little bit too early. Hey, Sean McVay's not ready. Well, if you think he's going to be outstanding, but you know he's not ready, do you take him when you have an opportunity to take him, knowing you're probably going to miss out on him in the next year or two after you hire your head coach? I think that's a valid way to think about this. All right, let's see if there's anything else you guys got here on me. I hate the Bills move. Ooh, is that a Banksy? No, that's a Nixon Palmer. My son made that, which is absolutely fire. And he actually has a new piece that is going to be displayed at the Denver Museum of Art coming up, which is pretty sweet for a 13-year-old. Okay. Shador Sanders. Let's get into kind of him being named to the Pro Bowl. And I'll just say this flat out. They had very limited options on the AFC side of things to fill the quarterback position. I'll just be frank with it there. Is he essentially a Pro Bowl quarterback? No. Most of these alternates, you could say, did not play at a Pro Bowl level that year. Does he get to go to the Pro Bowl? Certainly. This isn't a shot at Shador Sanders. I think he would tell you he wasn't a Pro Bowl quarterback this year with 7 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. But again, there were certain guys that turned it down. There were certain guys that, because of injury, weren't available. You look at Bo Nix is on a scooter. You have all these other options within that conference that you didn't have a lot of. And so what I would say about Shador Sanders going to the Pro Bowl, this game is for entertainment purposes. It is fun. It is fun to watch. It is not a football game. I do think what he should do, and I've heard guys talk about this before, is approach the Pro Bowl the right way. And approaching the Pro Bowl the right way for Shador Sanders, in my mind, is you have been invited, even though you probably didn't have the credentials to be invited, you have been invited to a master class on quarterback play. So take full advantage of it. Sit there with the quarterbacks and pick their brains. I've heard other young quarterbacks do this. There were guys that were like, when I went to the Pro Bowl when I was a young quarterback, and even though I was an alternate and went, I sat with Peyton Manning and I picked his brain the entire time. I took notes. What do you do in the off season? What do you do in terms of your mental preparation? How do you get your body right? How do you keep your arm from getting sore when you throw that many balls during the season? Blah, blah, all those different things. This is an invitation for Shador Sanders to continue to grow as a quarterback. There were a lot of people that said he has some talent. He has some playmaking ability. Can he continue to develop to play NFL-style quarterback? I'm pleading, saying, Shador, take advantage of this opportunity, because getting this invitation that, again, probably wasn't warranted, and he's not alone. This isn't a shot at him. They need to fill out the rosters. There's several guys that end up going that are not warranted to be there, so take advantage of it. You're getting a chance to be in this environment and take full advantage of that opportunity. Okay, let's see if there's anything else there. Flacco should be in the Pro Bowl. Hey, still one of the prettiest throwers of the football of all time. I guarantee the guy will be able to throw it 60 yards when he's 60 years old. San Francisco needs a DC. They certainly do, and I think they have their eye on a couple, and that could be filled relatively soon. I think some of these other spots are going to drop soon. We'll see what ends up happening, I think, in the next couple of days. But we'll see with Vegas specifically. Maybe it does, but I do think if Clint Kubiak's firmly in the mix, then it doesn't. But we'll see. But again, we got all these jobs to fill out. Now we got some coordinator jobs we're still looking for, and these staffs still need to be built out entirely. It's going to be a fun next couple of weeks as we start to figure out what the landscape entirely is. But Joe Brady is the new head coach of the Buffalo Bills. They don't want to make another move for some time. We'll see if they made the right one. All right, everybody, appreciate you hanging out. Thanks for joining us, even though we started a little bit late. I will see you next Tuesday. Next Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern. Take it easy.